Right, welcome back. Of course, it's still the TVC Breakfast here. Now, the presidency has confirmed the receipt of the 2018 appropriation bill from the National Assembly.
The senior special assistant to the president on National Assembly matters, Ita Enang, confirmed the development on Friday, May the 25th. Both chambers of the National Assembly approved the bill on May the 16th, hiking the estimate from the 8.6 trillion naira submitted by the executive to 9.1 trillion naira.
Let's now bring in Dr. Ikenna Nwosu of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce. Is here in the studios with us to talk more about the 2018 budget. Thank you very much indeed for coming.
Thank you very much.
Good morning.
All right, the 2018 budget moved from 8-something trillion to 9-something trillion, about 500 billion, added by the National Assembly. Did it meet your expectation as an economist?
Well, thank you. 500 billion addition. What gave us hope was that the understanding is, first, the increase is because of the upward swing in the price of international price of crude oil.
Yes, which was based on 45 barrels per day.
Correct.
Pardon,
dollar per barrel. Now, the 500 billion we understand is going to be allocated more for capex, capital expenditure. So that's what gives us more hope. It's rather than going into recurrent. Because we've always said that there should be an increase in the ratio. If you look at this budget, just like most of the budgets in the last administration, the ratio of capital to recurrent is 30-70. We've been asking that there should be an increase in the ratio of allocation for capital expenditure. So we support the increase, upward increase from 8.6 to 9.12 trillion based on the international price of crude oil. And we support the fact that the allocation is for capex. So we, the organized private sector, we think that was the right decision and by the National Assembly, and we hope the executive arm of government will maintain that.
And looking at the crude oil benchmarks set now in the reviewed appropriation bills, $21 per barrel, and knowing that the price at the moment is higher than that, you think it's still realistic?
Yes, I think it is. There are so many vicissitudes to the international price of oil, so many, and many of them are not subject to the control of even states, international countries, international states. Many of them are even subject to non-state actors when hostilities rise and things like that. So there could be a possibility. Yes, we've been seeing a gradual upward swing. There is a possibility, if not even a probability, that there could be drop, sharp or shallow. So I think the National Assembly, they took professional advice in arriving at that decision, and we believe that they made adequate arrangement for buffer. Of course, the excess crude account is there for any excess to be kept aside and recorded.
Well, you expressed a bit of optimism that about 500 billion was added instead, to the capital side of the divide rather than the recurrent side of the divide, even though that the budget as it is at the moment has taken the same shape like the rest we've had, the current being 3-point-something and then the capital being 2-point-something trillion. Does it concern you or does it bother you that most of it would be financed through borrowing?
Well, we are a bit concerned, as we were with the 2017 budget, about that. When you check the revenue estimates, quite optimistic. Now, you also check as 2.2 trillion for debt servicing. That's about 24% of the budget. So we looked at it and we said, well, the debt servicing ratio to GDP, looked at it, not too bad.
But not impressive.
No, we're fine with it, not too bad, but there has to be strict discipline in the implementation of the budget. And part of the danger we find it's this budget, today's date is the 28th of May. The year has gone 5 months. Now, the standard budget cycle is January to December. Now we are doing May 28th. We are hoping the president should sign it by the 31st of May, hopefully, so that we know by the 1st of June we start implementation. So where our other concern comes up is that losing 5 months of the year, fiscal year, creates problems for economic planning. Secondly, creates problems for implementation challenges, because particularly for the capital expenditure, because when you want to implement, you have to put out bids, invite expressions of interest. The bids are submitted, defended, vetted, and you make approvals before, go send it for final approval by FEC, and then you now talk of releasing funds. You've lost 5 months of the year. How does the rest? So you find that capital expenditure in terms of implementation will be most affected by the time lost. So that's the aspect that we are really concerned about. Yes, we see the amount allocated for paying debts. We see the projections for revenues. We believe the revenue could be achieved, despite the fact that a lot of borrowing is going to be done. But paying back has to be strict. And when we consider again, we're going into an election year. That poses for us a lot of, concern as the organized private sector. Because any year before an election year, traditionally in Nigeria, governance tends to take, I won't completely say a backseat, but in the terms of scale of preference, politics comes first, and then governance comes second. So, and that usually happens from mid-year. So that's why we say we hope the president signs his budget quickly, and then let all the various MDAs need to do what they have to do, because from June, start talking about primaries and all that.
Exactly, and it seems it's just a copy and paste, excuse me, budget situation we are experiencing this year as well. Just like last year, this just could be earlier, hopefully. Anyway, you talked earlier about the debt servicing, though on a high side, but still pretty much considerable. But then when you look at our debt to GDP ratio, is it impressive, really? And then, of course, like you said, going into an election year, the possibility of inflation, and then still having 2017 budget pretty much maybe in the half mark or just a little after that.
Yes, a lot of concern all around, and all of them intertwined. Yes, the debt to GDP ratio, we've looked at it. It gives us some cause for concern, but like I said, with strict fiscal discipline, that should be able to be overcome. The interest rate is about 12%. The inflation rate, which is one of the assumptions of the budget, is about 12-point-something%, almost at par with inflation. Inflation rate almost at par with interest.
The interest was 14%.
That's fine. Not too much marginal difference. But you see, when you talked about the issue of the quality of the budget, where we have concern is, you recall that the National Assembly, I mean, the executive needs to be more disciplined in terms of, and more professional when presenting this budget. You recall that, especially at the Senate, in fact, at both houses, there was a lot of uproar when the initial budget was sent in, because they didn't have the details attached to it. Now that led to some delays. You know, how to wait for the details to be sent in. When it was sent in, there was another major complaint by the presiding officers of both houses that most of the CEOs of the MDAs refused to come and defend their budgets. It took an instruction from the presidency.
And then the GOEs as well, government-owned enterprises.
Enterprises, exactly. So it took an instruction from the presidency for them to come and defend their budget. Now, you find that, I don't know how to describe that, but I mean, if the appropriation bill is an executive bill, so you expect that the people in the executive, the CEOs of the various enterprises, should be forthcoming to come and defend their budget. So that was part of the delay. And the National Assembly kept saying, we don't want to be held responsible tomorrow by Nigerians for this delay. So going forward, there needs to be more, first of all, the executive has to be more disciplined. Second, they need to submit this budget perhaps half year.
I was about to ask
by
that.
June, rather than in October, to give more time for consideration. Thirdly, they have to be more prudent and perhaps more efficient in the implementation of the budget. So you don't have this problem with National Assembly about poor implementation, not up to 50% sometimes. Fourthly, we believe that there needs to be better communication between the executive and the National Assembly, because some of the miscommunication makes especially the SSS to the President of National Assembly of Matters and the gentleman in charge of the House of Reps, with the National Assembly itself. There should be more communication, and going forward, that communication will improve the cooperation between the two, because when it comes to the national budget, it shouldn't be adversarial. They're working together for Nigerians. So, and at the end of the day, it is always the ordinary Nigerian, the economy, the OPS, organized private sector, that suffer the brunt of poor budget implementation, arising from so many factors, and a lot of them from the executive side of government.
Well, the essence of this whole thing is essentially to, to create better governance, so that the mass of the people will be the beneficiaries. That's the essence of the whole thing. Isn't it possible to prune down the cost of governance so that we have more funds allocated to, capital side of things? I'm still concerned about that. Isn't it possible? Because what you see, the recurrent is essentially about, cost of governance, the bloated, lifestyles of, government functionaries and all of that. Isn't it possible to prune down the cost of governance so that more money is allocated to the capital side of things and to the benefit of the mass of the people?
It's possible. The OPS has always raised serious concerns, year in, year out, about the cost of governance, both on the executive side and on the legislative side. Yes. Incidentally, we've kept complaining that the judiciary is highly underfunded, and I think they don't have a first-line charge to the Federation account. But it requires, you see, they throw darts at each other, the executive, the legislature. Your budget is quite high, it's over-bloated, this is quite high. And the National Assembly on its own will always want to increase its own share of the budget. Suomoto by itself, without the executive's input. And the executive seems to do more down there. The National Assembly leadership will point to the lifestyle and expenditure style of the executive based on high recurrence. Now, we think there should be perhaps a retreat. The National Assembly should have a retreat with the executive. This should be with the leadership, with the Federal Executive Council, and seriously compare best practice in other countries with this. If they require resource people from the private sector, from the World Bank, the IMF, and even from other legislatures.
On how to better manage
the budgeting process to reduce recurrence. That's fine. And there has to be also, like the OPS has always said, because of the high deficit in the budget and arising from high recurrence, there is always this undue pressure by the presidency on revenue generating agencies to generate revenue to meet target, a set target for them. And we have said that professionally is wrong. For instance, the Nigerian Customs Service, worldwide, the World Customs Organization says your primary role is trade facilitation, not revenue generation. So when you facilitate trade, naturally revenue will be generated. But in Nigeria here, the federal government will fix revenue targets for customs. And when they meet that target, they have to do everything to meet it. And when they meet and surpass it, it is celebrated. Now, you are turning the role of custom upside down, revenue generation. So it's more of trade facilitation than revenue generation. So this is part of why we say, don't put unnecessary pressure on the revenue generating agencies just because you want to meet your revenue targets so that your recurrent expenditure is not focused. So you're putting the cart before the horse. And I think that's not the way to solve the problem.
And to think that this budget reflects that the country will still be dependent on oil,
Wow, it's it's something that we've always complained about. You recall that in, was it 2014, that our national economy was rebased and became the largest in Africa.
In Africa, yes.
With revenue streams from Nollywood and the creative industries and all that, so tourism. So we were quite happy that non-oil contribution to GDP was rising. Okay. Mr. President's visit to America, the American president told him point blank, we're not going to buy your oil. So we are looking more to Asia. Now, worldwide, the use of oil is dropping.
Yes.
electric cars coming out and all that. Now, in Nigeria, there has been a deliberate attempt by many states to raise their IGR because they see the consistent dwindling contribution of oil, reducing the monthly allocation to them. The government, and that is part of why we are happy with the National Assembly for the figure they raised. You know, you asked that question about why they used the, yes, it's a bit lower than the international price. Now, we are concerned that
I asked, of course.
the government has not, the executive, has not given sufficient attention to non-oil revenue sources outside the traditional agriculture. You should look at the other new sectors that create revenue. The president has emphasized on the issue of job creation, but there are new areas, ICT, even sports as a business, the business side of sports.
Yeah.
So these are new areas that the government needs to look at to raise new revenue streams, not just for government, but for the private sector as well. Because at the end of the day, when the revenue streams come in, it improves the GDP of the country. So we want to believe and we hope and we will emphasize in the next 7 months that the government needs to open up new economic sectors to create new revenue streams for the country and stop giving revenue targets to what they term revenue generating agencies. We want to see how this
But they're focusing on tax anyway.
I know, but the taxation process should be less adversarial because a lot of us complain that in trying to meet your revenue targets for tax, sometimes with the FIRS and some of the states, internal revenue services, become adversarial. The taxation doesn't have to be adversarial. The countries where we borrow the example from, they are not adversarial. So I think it's better to do voluntary compliance rather than punitive.
Well, after giving Nigerians the window, you know, to come declare their assets, their incomes and all that, so that it can be easier.
Exactly. I think that's better. And some of the assumptions they make in doing the taxations, I think they should be more balanced. You don't assume that if you employ somebody who's a graduate, this is how much you think you expect he should be earning. Look at what are the realities on the ground. Frankly, the recession that happened globally, the effects are still being felt, even by the bigger countries. So Nigeria has to be very realistic in trying to fix revenue targets based on the budgeting process. And if I may come back to the desk in the government that is in charge of the budget, the Ministry for Economic Planning and Budgeting. It is very important. There are 2 ministers there. It is very important that because they've lost 5 months, the ministers have to be very up and doing to ensure that all approvals for capex expenditures are given speedy process at Federal Executive Council meetings, working closely with the SGF.
So that they don't go through the bureaucratic processes
Exactly.
that delay things.
And with the due process office, which has to approve the process where it's gone through, because we are very much behind time. And many of the ministers, all the ministers are politicians. And when the campaign starts, they'll be asked to go to their various states to campaign for government. So, like we said, governance may take a little bit of a backseat. So the earlier these approvals are given, the better. And
you know, Dr. Musu,
Yes,
there are concerns arising even at the moment that the 2018 budget may also go the way of the other budgets, 2016, 2017. Shabby implementation. That's a major issue. We've never had issues with creating these budgets, but putting them to work has always been the problem.
It's always been a problem. Now, we expressed that concern to the Senate President when the Lagos Chamber of Commerce visited him about a week back. And frankly, we were quite happy that organized private sector and the Parliament are having that rapport. We raised that concern to him, and he said certainly he'll see what he will do with the executive in terms of implementation. 40% or so? I don't think we achieved up to 50% implementation of the 2016 and 2017 budgets. And then there is always the problem of the excess funds released by the Ministry of Finance, the warrants, going back to the central port, the Federation account at the end of the year. Luckily, we have TSA, the Treasury Single Account, so that makes it a bit easier for monitoring. However, like the Senate raised as a major concern while considering the budget, this poor implementation of the budget creates a lot of financial distortions Because what the National Assembly expects to do is to monitor part of the oversight function, monitor the budget implementation as a basis for agreeing the figures to allocate to each MDA. Because if they believe that, okay, for instance, in the budget, Ministry of Power, Housing, and Works has the highest allocation, 684 billion.
The super ministries.
I recall that the Honorable Minister has some issues with the National Assembly over the issue of how did you implement this, to what extent did you, and why should we allocate this amount to you if you're not sure it's going to be used, fully. Otherwise, we'll reduce it and take it to other sectors that need to be, that need more funding. So it's the National Assembly has raised that concern consistently. The OPS has raised that concern consistently. We need to see more inertia from the executive in responding to these justifiable concerns, so that matching orders are given to ministers, like I said earlier. Implementation. You must focus on it before you start going for your...
And some lawmakers really raised that concern when the president presented the 2018 appropriation bill, saying that how far so far with the 2017 budget, and you're here again with the 2017. And in essence, what this means is that development will be slowed down across the board.
Of course. When you look at it, you see, there's a value chain to the budgeting process. We're in May. We are recommending in the organized private sector that the budgeting for 2019, that the draft budget should be submitted next month, June, or June 30th. Yeah. That's our own professional advice. Now, if you're going to submit it to June 30th, that means hopefully you may have done only 1 month of implementation of 2018. So how would you have appraised 2018 in order to know what figures will go to 2019? So these are some of the discussions we're talking about. And not just does it affect economic development, it affects revenue streams, it affects economic development planning, budget implementation, and all the projections of the private sector and the projections of the foreign companies who are operating here. Again, the exchange rate, I think, assumption was about 305 naira to a dollar.
305 naira, yes, to a dollar.
305.
Good. With elections coming, and the economy is going to be awash with a lot of cash.
Excess liquidity.
Excess liquidity. Which you are sure the CBN will be having challenges, trying to mop up.
Yeah.
How then does that affect the exchange rate assumptions? And how will the private sector and the financial sector react to that? So the distortions that I have highlighted, and you have asked how it affects economic planning, are quite several. And I'm sure going forward, by the time the president signs the budget, with or without objections, with or without need for supplementary appropriation, you will begin to see organized private sector sessions dissecting the budget in all parameters. Every company, every major multinational is going to have a document in front of them. The IMF, the World Bank, they're going to study to know how does this affect our final investment decisions going forward in every single economic sector. So what you find is 5 months down the line, last year the budget was passed about the same, was it April? Last year in 2017?
No, around June, July.
June, July? Good. Okay, we've improved by 1 or 2 months. But I think that going forward, we should start from June. Whether it is going to distort the implementation of this budget or not, I think that the Honorable Minister of Finance, and this is our honest opinion, should get her colleagues together and see if we cannot do June, then let it be that the budget goes in within this 3rd quarter.
But Doctor, if you remember very clearly,
well, because of time, the director has been saying that we have to wrap it at this point.
I see. Just before we round up, I would just very quickly, Doctor, I'm not an economic mind, but I'm just thinking, I'm a thinker, whether there could be a punitive measure, to allow to help the process of implementation of budgets, especially to the MDAs. And look, if you do not implement, so percentage of your, budget, then there has to be this, consequence for it. Maybe that will help.
Let it be an output of the proposed retreat between the executive and the legislature, comparing best practice and find out what is the punitive measure in some other jurisdictions. Use that as best practice, domesticate it to our country, then I think it will work that way. Because in Nigeria, when there is consequence, people tend to be more compliant.
Yeah.
That's my last take.
All right.
Dr. K. Nwanwosu, Lagos Chambers of Commerce and Industry, thank you very much for coming to the show.
Thank you very much.